It all started with what seemed like an ordinary morning in my quiet suburban neighborhood. The sun had just risen, casting golden light across the rooftops, and I was sipping my coffee while standing on my porch. Life felt calm, almost perfect, until I noticed a letter stuffed into my mailbox. At first, I didn't think much of it. I get plenty of flyers, promotions, and sometimes HOA notices about neighborhood events. But the bold red lettering on the envelope immediately sent a chill down my spine. Urgent, HOA violation notice. I tore it open, and as my eyes scanned the words, my stomach sank. According to the letter, my house was in violation of multiple HOA rules, and if I didn't take immediate corrective action, I could face escalating fines and even eviction proceedings. Eviction. From the home I worked my entire life to build, the home where my kids took their first steps, the home I poured my savings into. It didn't make sense. Nothing in that letter reflected reality. My lawn was cut, my paint was fresh, my mailbox was standard, and every detail was within regulations. Or so I thought. The signature at the bottom was what really set me off. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood. She wasn't just any member of the HOA. She was the loudest voice on the board. The one who inserted herself into every meeting, every complaint, every tiny detail of our community. If you sneezed too loud, Karen was the one knocking on your door with a tissue in one hand and a complaint in the other. I remember the first time I met her. She had that forced smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. She introduced herself as if she were the mayor of the neighborhood, telling me about all the rules we had to follow. But the way she said it made it sound less like guidelines and more like personal orders. Over time, I saw how she manipulated situations, how she pushed her agenda, and how she loved the power the HOA gave her. Some neighbors tried to avoid her, some feared her, and others quietly resented her. This letter wasn't just a random violation notice. It was personal. The accusations were absurd. My front door color was too bold, my trash cans were visible for too long, and my backyard shed, which had been approved years ago, was suddenly unauthorized. Each claim was flimsy, but the threat was real. The fine started small, $50 here, $100 there, but the letter made it clear they would escalate quickly if I didn't cooperate. I went inside, sat down at the table, and spread out the papers. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from anger. I knew Karen had been gunning for me. For weeks, I had heard little whispers from neighbors that she had made snide comments about my property. His house ruins the aesthetic. I bet he didn't even file the right paperwork. That backyard looked suspiciously big for what's allowed. At first, I brushed it off, but now it was clear. She wanted me gone. The question was, why? Days turned into weeks, and the pressure mounted. More letters came, each one piling onto the last, each one more aggressive. Then came the phone calls. HOA representatives, people who were clearly parroting Karen's words, started calling, demanding immediate compliance. I tried to reason with them, asking for proof, asking for an inspection, asking for clarity. But every time, the response was the same. Failure to comply will result in further action. My wife was anxious. My kids overheard more than they should have, and every time I pulled into the driveway, I felt like eyes were burning holes in my back. Karen was always watching. Her blinds would twitch when I mowed the lawn. Her car would crawl slowly past our house as if patrolling. She was relentless. The worst part, she wasn't just after me for the sake of rules. She had an agenda. I later learned through a neighbor that Karen had been telling people she wanted to buy my house for her cousin who was looking to move into the neighborhood. She wanted me out, and she was using the HOA as her weapon. I knew then that if I didn't fight back, I'd lose everything. But fighting Karen wasn't easy. She thrived on confrontation. She lived for drama, and she knew how to twist the rules to her advantage. The HOA board was practically her kingdom, and most members were either too passive or too intimidated to oppose her. But I had something she didn't expect: patience, documentation, and the will to fight fire with fire. The first step was gathering evidence. I started keeping every letter, every email, every voicemail. I documented the dates, the times, the wording. I took photos of my lawn, my door, my shed. Everything they claimed was a violation. I spoke to a couple of neighbors who had similar run-ins with Karen, and slowly, a pattern began to emerge. She had targeted at least 3 other families before me, pushing them with endless complaints until they either gave in or moved out. One evening, as I was sifting through papers, I had a thought. If Karen was so obsessed with enforcing the rules, surely she was breaking some herself. That's when I decided to take a walk. Camera in hand, I strolled casually through the neighborhood. I wasn't trespassing, just walking down public sidewalks, snapping pictures of things that caught my eye. And what I found was shocking. Karen's backyard shed? Built without approval. Her driveway extension? Non-compliant. Her fence height? Over the legal limit. And the list went on. It was as if she had been projecting her own violations onto everyone else to cover her tracks. That night, as I uploaded the photos to my computer, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But hope alone wasn't enough. I needed a strategy. I knew if I confronted Karen directly, she'd twist it around and make me the villain. No, I needed to play this smart. I compiled everything into a neat folder, printed documents, photos, HOA bylaws. I even highlighted the exact clauses she had broken. By the time I was done, my case was airtight. The next HOA meeting was going to be interesting. The night before the HOA meeting, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Karen's smug face, her condescending tone, the way she always made people feel small. But this time, I wasn't walking in unprepared. For weeks, she had been tightening the noose around my neck, convinced she had already won. What she didn't know was that I had built a case so solid, it was about to shatter her entire illusion of power. When I arrived at the community center where the HOA meetings were held, the room already buzzed with low chatter. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, clutching papers, murmuring to each other about the latest disputes. At the head of the room sat Karen, like a queen on her throne, gavel in hand, lips pursed, scanning the crowd as if she were already judging every single person in the room. Her eyes locked onto me the moment I walked in. She smirked. That smirk almost made me lose my composure. But I took a deep breath and kept walking. The meeting started like they always did, boring updates about landscaping, pool maintenance, community events. But everyone knew the real reason people came. The drama. And when Karen cleared her throat and shuffled her stack of papers, I knew it was about to begin. Next on the agenda, she said in that falsely sweet but sharp tone, "We have repeated violations from one particular homeowner." Her eyes darted straight at me. "Despite numerous notices, there has been no compliance, and the board must now consider escalated measures." A few heads turned toward me, some sympathetic, others curious, all waiting to see what would happen. Karen went on, listing every so-called violation: the lawn, the mailbox, the shed. Her voice dripped with satisfaction, as if each accusation was a personal victory. She spoke with such confidence, such authority, that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed her. When she finally finished, she looked up with that smirk again. As per HOA bylaws, continued noncompliance could result in fines exceeding $1,000 per month, and in extreme cases, legal proceedings that could include foreclosure. The room grew tense. People whispered, "Foreclosure." It was a word heavy enough to silence even the most disinterested neighbor. Karen leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying the fear she was spreading. I raised my hand. "May I respond?" She hesitated, then nodded, though her eyes told me she thought this was going to be easy, another chance to humiliate me. I stood, pulling out my folder. My voice was steady, calm, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've heard the accusations, and I've taken them very seriously. That's why I've documented everything, every notice, every email, every so-called violation." I held up the thick stack of papers, and I've cross-checked them with our own HOA bylaws. The truth is, not one of these claims holds up under scrutiny. Karen's smirk faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "That's not for you to decide. The board has already reviewed." I cut her off. Actually, it is for me to decide when I'm being falsely accused. And it's for this community to know when the rules are being applied unfairly. Because while you've been targeting me, Karen, you've conveniently ignored your own violations. The room erupted in whispers. Karen's face flushed. Excuse me? She snapped. I laid out the photos on the table for the board members to see. This is your backyard shed, built without approval. Here's the clause you violated. This is your driveway extension, not within regulations. Here's the clause. This is your fence, too tall by 3 inches, in direct violation of Section 4A. I flipped page after page, showing evidence, pointing to bylaws, leaving no room for doubt. The board members leaned in, eyebrows raised, murmuring to each other as they examined the proof. One even frowned, clearly uncomfortable with what they were seeing. Karen tried to interrupt. This is outrageous. He's twisting things. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But I didn't stop. I kept my voice calm, deliberate, confident. For weeks, Karen has harassed me with baseless accusations, threatening my family, threatening my home. But what she didn't expect was that the very rules she weaponized against me would turn around and expose her. She hasn't just broken a rule or two. She's made a habit of it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. People turned to each other, whispering, some even laughing quietly. The shift in the room was palpable. The power Karen had held over everyone for so long was slipping right through her fingers. The board chair, a man who usually stayed quiet while Karen dominated, finally cleared his throat. These are serious allegations, and the evidence seems substantial. Karen, do you have a response to these specific violations? Karen stammered, her voice higher now, shaky. This is just, he's exaggerating, misinterpreting. Everyone does little things. I held up the HOA bylaws. Little things? These are the same rules you've been using to threaten me with foreclosure. If the rules apply to me, they apply to you. Or do you believe you're above them? That was it. The dagger. The line that pierced her carefully crafted armor. The room erupted in whispers again, this time louder, more emboldened. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down were now openly looking at her, questioning her, seeing her not as the enforcer but as the hypocrite she truly was. Karen's face turned crimson. She slammed her gavel down. This meeting is adjourned, she barked, trying to regain control. But it was too late. People weren't afraid anymore. They saw her for what she was. As the room emptied, several neighbors approached me, quietly thanking me, telling me their own stories of how Karen had targeted them, too. It was as if my stand had given them permission to finally speak up. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting this battle alone. But Karen wasn't finished. I could see it in her eyes as she stormed past me. She wasn't used to losing, and she wasn't going to go down without a fight. What she didn't realize was that she had already lost. The wheels of karma were already turning, and her downfall had only just begun. After that meeting, something changed in the neighborhood. For the first time in years, people weren't looking at Karen with fear. They were looking at her with suspicion. Whispers followed her every time she walked down the street. The once confident stride she carried now looked forced, stiff, and heavy. I could tell she hated it. She had ruled this community for so long, feeding off everyone's silence. But now the silence was broken. A few days later, I got another letter from the HOA, but this one was different. It wasn't a violation notice. It was a request for an official review of the evidence I had presented. Apparently, my complaints against Karen had reached enough ears on the board that they couldn't just ignore them. She wasn't invincible anymore. Karen tried to act like nothing had changed. She still walked past my house with her nose in the air, still parked her car just a little too close to my driveway as if marking her territory, still muttered loud enough for me to hear when she was on the phone in her yard. But underneath that facade, I could see the cracks forming. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, my neighbor Paul stopped by. He was an older guy, retired military, the kind of man who didn't like to get involved in drama. But even he had had enough. You really rattled her cage, he said with a small smile. You know, she tried the same thing with me a few years back. Said my garage door color wasn't approved. I didn't fight it then, but I wish I had. Good on you for standing up. I realized then that Karen's downfall wasn't going to come just from me. It was going to come from all the people she had trampled over the years. One by one, they were starting to find their voices. The official HOA investigation into her violations moved slowly, but I didn't sit idle. I kept documenting, kept watching. I even filed a request to see the HOA's financial records, something every homeowner had the right to do. When the papers finally came back, my jaw dropped. There were miscellaneous expenses that didn't add up, landscaping bills that were suspiciously inflated, and even a payment made to a consultant who turned out to be Karen's cousin. It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just abusing her power socially, she was financially exploiting the HOA too. I compiled everything, making copies of every questionable entry. By now, I had a thick binder, not just a folder. This wasn't just a petty neighbor dispute anymore. This was corruption. The next HOA meeting was even more tense than the last. People filled the room, more than usual, curious to see if something big was about to happen. Karen tried to open the meeting as usual, gavel in hand, voice raised, but the murmurs in the room drowned her out. When I stood up and presented the financial documents, the room went silent. "This isn't just about me anymore," I said. "This is about all of us. Our money, our community. Look at these records. Thousands of dollars in unexplained expenses, payments to family members, inflated contracts, and all of it tied back to Karen's time on the board." Gasps filled the air. People leaned forward in their chairs, squinting at the copies I had handed out. Karen's face turned pale. She stammered, tried to interrupt, but the chair of the board, who had been silent for so long, raised his hand. "Karen, is this true?" She shook her head furiously. "It's all lies. He's twisting numbers, he's making things up." But the numbers didn't lie. They were right there in black and white. And for once, people weren't taking her word as gospel. That night, the board voted to launch an independent audit. Karen screamed, slammed her gavel, even threatened to quit. But the damage was done. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling. After the meeting, neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering, exchanging stories. Several came up to me, thanking me again, telling me they had suspected something was wrong but never had the proof. I felt a weight lifting, not because the fight was over, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Over the next few weeks, the audit uncovered everything I had suspected and more. Unauthorized expenses, misuse of HOA funds, even personal purchases hidden in the budget. It was the smoking gun. Karen was forced to step down from the board. She lost her position, her influence, her throne. But karma wasn't finished with her yet. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People who had once avoided her now openly ignored her. She became a pariah in her own kingdom. Her once constant patrols around the neighborhood stopped. The blinds in her windows stayed closed. Her smug smile disappeared. And then, the final blow came. With the evidence of financial misconduct, the HOA pursued legal action. She was ordered to pay back thousands of dollars. Rumor had it she even had to take out a loan just to cover the fines. The woman who had once threatened to take my house nearly lost her own. I'll never forget the day I saw the "for sale" sign go up in her yard. I stood at my window, sipping my coffee, and watched as she and her family packed boxes into a moving truck. She wouldn't look at anyone, wouldn't wave, wouldn't even make eye contact. The queen had been dethroned, not by anger, not by shouting, but by the very rules she thought she controlled. As the truck pulled away, I couldn't help but smile. Karma had done its work. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. But it wasn't the same kind of normal that Karen had ruled over. It was lighter now, freer. People waved at each other more, chatted in their yards, even organized a small block party, something Karen would have shut down instantly for being too disruptive. For the first time since moving in, I actually felt like I belonged. Walking through the streets didn't carry the same tension anymore. I didn't glance over my shoulder expecting to see Karen glaring at me from her porch. Her house, the one with the "for sale" sign that had once been the fortress of her authority, now stood empty. The windows were bare, the yard neglected, the air heavy with the echo of her absence. It was strange, honestly. For so long, she had been this looming figure in my life, this source of stress and anger, and now she was just gone. Just like that, karma had taken care of her in ways I never could have planned. One afternoon, as I was trimming my hedges, Paul walked over again. He leaned against the fence, watching the kids down the street ride their bikes. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said. "Yeah," I replied, "like we finally got our neighborhood back." He nodded. She thought she was untouchable, but no one's above the rules. Not even her. That stuck with me, because that was the heart of the story, wasn't it? She had used the rules as weapons, bending them to her will, twisting them to control others. But in the end, those same rules turned against her. The HOA policies, the financial audits, the very system she thought she had mastered, those became the tools of her own undoing. Weeks turned into months, and eventually, a new family moved into Karen's old house. They were kind, friendly, and eager to be part of the community. No more nasty letters, no more threats, no more power trips. It was like a shadow had lifted. And yet, every time I walked past that house, I couldn't help but think about her. Not with anger anymore, but with a strange sense of closure. She had tried to take everything from me, my peace, my home, my happiness. But in the end, she lost it all. Sometimes, when I share this story, people ask me if I felt sorry for her. If, at the end of it all, I thought karma went too far. And I always give the same answer. Karen made her choices. She hurt people, manipulated them, exploited them. She wasn't a victim of bad luck. She was a victim of her own actions. And maybe that's the lesson here. That no matter how much power someone thinks they have, no matter how untouchable they believe they are, eventually the truth catches up. Eventually, karma knocks on their door. So, what do you think? If you were in my shoes, would you have fought back against Karen? Or would you have just kept your head down and waited for karma to do its thing? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a neighbor from hell, share it. You never know. Your story might just help someone else going through the same thing. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more tales of revenge, karma, and justice served in the most unexpected ways. Your support means the world, and it helps us keep bringing you stories that prove one thing. In the end, karma always finds its way.